All right, guys. About time to start, but I still need a Jabber scribe. Somebody have Jabber installed on their laptop? Anybody? We'll buy somebody a coffee, beer, anything. Hey, Kevin, do you happen to have Jabber installed on your laptop?
I do not.
I was hoping somebody else was going to show up, and somebody in particular was going to show up, and I was going to recruit them, but they're not here, so.
Is Matt not in the room?
Who?
Matt?
I don't see him. Let me see if I could do it real quick. Anybody who just strolled in want to be a Jabber scribe? Oh. Oh, it's not hard at all. Just need somebody to do it. Thank you. All right, Kevin, I think we're ready.
All right. You want to drive?
Sure.
Or you want me to do it? Okay.
All right, everybody. It's time to get started. This is the Cdni working group. Hope this is where you want to be. So chairs are Kevin, who's remote, and myself, and Francois. We have one session. It's just today and just in this room. I already have minute taker. I already have Jabber scribe, and blue sheets are going around. So this is the note well. I'm sure you've seen this. As everybody likes to say, please note it well. Anything you say in here is a contribution. So, all right, here's our agenda for today. Be agenda bashing and introduction from the chairs, a document status update. I'm going to talk about URI signing for a little bit, and then we will. Frederick will talk about HTTPS delegation, and then Ori is going to talk about the SVAOC drafts, one of which is now a working group document. And then we're going to talk a little bit about rechartering at the end, and if we need to or not, and conclusions and next steps. So before we go any further, does anybody want to bash this agenda? Nope. All right. Kevin, you want to do this part?
Yep. The slides are turning really slowly, so I'm going to assume you already have the slide up.
Yeah, the working group milestones and published RFCs.
Right. So these two lists haven't changed any. These are our published RFCs. We can skip through those 2 pages. The current remaining milestone, the only milestone that we have currently is the URI signing, which hopefully will be done very soon. We're going to get an update on that today. On the next slide, we have our beyond working group milestones, Cdni HTTPS delegation, which Frederick's going to talk about, and we have an adoption call out currently, which it's looking like we're probably going to get an adoption there. The Cdni request routing extensions, as Phil just mentioned, we did adopt that. And then there's the Cdni control interface triggers extensions, which last time we discussed might need a charter update, but we will talk about that at the end. We will be adding milestones for the new documents that are not currently, that have been adopted or will be adopted, but are not currently milestones. And we're not currently pursuing the rate pacing at this time, unless someone in the working group has a strong feeling about the need to add rate pacing metadata. So next slide. So I think we're ready to go, Phil, if you're ready.
All right, bring up my slides. All right. Shout out to Brian Campbell for his awesome pictures that he offered up for this. Oh, why? Hold on. There we go, much better. All right, so right now we're sitting on draft 16. That was uploaded right before the deadline. So we had another 115 that was just there was a small goof in it, so I just did a 16. So basically the changes since 14. Added the critical claim set. This is something we talked about in Montreal. We also talked a lot about the signed token depth, and this was actually what took the longest, took the most amount of work to get right. So we had some conversations in Montreal and on the mailing list and on the issues about this. And the final consensus on it was that we would go with signed token depth. So I didn't hear any more issues on that, so I merged that one in. We removed the simple URI container that was non-controversial that we talked about in Montreal, and some small nits. So next steps, I think personally, as editor, we're ready for working group last call. So, and I would like to hear comments as to whether or not people agree, if specifically people disagree with that. And that's about it.
Chris Lemons from Comcast. On your diff, you missed the swap between PCRE and ERE. I wouldn't necessarily discuss that as a small nit, but we did talk about it on the mailing list.
Yeah, very good point. Sorry I missed that. So we changed out, originally one of the URI containers was PCRE, and we switched it to ERE.
Yes.
Which is a POSIX standard. And we did have it talk about that on the mailing list, but I don't think there was as much discussion. I think that was just agreed upon that was the best route to go.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you for mentioning that. Forgot about that.
And the second thing, I actually opened a pull request against GitHub and made a comment on the mailing list. I found in practice 403 is not always the best answer. Sometimes when the token is out of date, there is a value in redirecting the client to somewhere they can get a better token or have a more useful error message or really a whole bunch of different use cases. And I think the language I put up is a potentially simple way to handle that. So we may want to consider some error handling as we go into last call. But yeah, I agree. We want to get this as close to finished as soon as we can.
Okay, so to give a little more background on what Chris said, he wants to be able to redirect the user somewhere in the event that their token is expired, that the token is invalid for reasons other than being like, can you?
Yeah, so the idea is if your token is bad, we want to, normally we just send you a 403. But if your token is bad, in some cases, we want to send you back to where you can get a good token, or maybe an alternate version of the content that doesn't require the token, or some fallback. There were a whole bunch of use cases that came up in practice. But we can't allow that to happen if the token is not signed properly, right, because otherwise we allow an amplification attack.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what I was trying to point out. So there was no other feedback on that. So I don't.
No discussion.
Yeah, there was no discussion on the mailing list and no discussion on the issue. I've prodded some people to see if we could get some feedback, but I don't know. So my feeling on it is that it's kind of an overcomplication, but I'm not opposed to getting it in. It just seems like I feel like we discussed it at some point and we said, wow, this is going to be a lot of extra detail to put in. But since you've already done the wording, I think it's worth talking about. But I would love to hear more feedback on that and whether or not we need to add that before working group last call or not. So that's my thoughts on it.
Agreed. Anybody have thoughts? I did put it up right before the meeting, actually technically during the meeting, so people may not have read it.
Didn't you put it up last week or like this weekend?
Yeah, it was this weekend,
Okay.
so it depends exactly
Not
when you
before
say
this meeting.
Right,
you mean
it
before the-
depends when you call the IETF meeting started. People may have been on their airplanes.
So
I haven't read it yet. Is the proposal a new claim, an optional claim? What is it?
As I have it currently worded, it's a pair of optional claims. One claim for what code to return, and one claim for what the location parameter should be. And the goal is to make it as simple as possible for implementers to handle. So it's an optional claim on signing, but processors must implement it.
Okay. And is it likely to increase the size of the token significantly?
Yes. Anyone who uses this claim will have to pay the cost of having the redirect location inside the token. But obviously, if you don't use the claim, then you don't have that in there.
Right.
There's no way around that. If you want something, you have to pay for it.
my other concern about it is having to have enough state to be able to have continuity for the user. So if you redirect them back to some sign-in page or whatever, there's got to be enough context in that URI that you redirect them to also then get them back to where they were. So it's going to be
Yep.
very large. It's going to be very large.
That's a correct observation. In fact, one of the requests originally was that the token, the bad token, be included as either a query string or path parameter or a cookie or whatever in the redirect process itself, so that whatever received the redirect would have that. And I felt like that was probably an unnecessary complication. But it would shrink the potential URI size.
So the other observation I had was that currently, if you're watching a video online and there's some kind of error, it's kind of like, hey, there's some kind of error, try this again later. And exiting out and going back, and I'm thinking Netflix, YouTube, that kind of thing. It seems to be a rare enough event and kind of an accepted user experience. Yeah, we could make it more seamless, but I feel
Right,
like,
but streaming video isn't the only use case here, right? This is general purpose and generally useful.
I guess I kind of feel like when there's an error, we don't always have to have this completely seamless flow.
Right, but if I actually have a user agent that's a browser at the other end of this, it would be really nice to be able to redirect them to the login page, because there are multiple use cases for this.
Were you just saying that it's two optional claims, however, the CDN is required to implement them?
Right. I don't see a way around that because it's error handling, right? So the receiver has to know what to do with it if someone gives it to them.
Yeah, because I feel like if it were just two optional claims and there weren't objections, it would be easier to put in. But putting a requirement that now this whole piece has to also be implemented makes the burden a little higher. But
The burden is a little bit
convinced.
higher. I don't see a way around that because the receiver, a receiver and a parser of the token has to be able to accept any valid token that's handed to it, right? There's no way for a receiver to say, I only implement half the spec. So if we put it in there, receivers have to be able to accept it. Although a signer is obviously allowed to implement any subset of claims that it feels is useful for its use case.
But it's different to say it's mandatory to understand versus mandatory to enforce, right? You can say you
Right.
must be able to parse this, but you don't necessarily have to be able to do the redirect, I guess.
Correct. And there may be security reasons why one CDN or another use case may choose to refuse to do so, right?
Right.
It might feel that for its use case, leaking that information is a security concern. And so it's going to refuse to comply. And certainly an implementation needs to have the flexibility to define their own policies around exactly what they do once they understand it.
So I guess, Phil, to your point, whether or not the CDN has to implement it, they have to recognize that claim tag, but they can toss the data if they want. Does that make it more palatable to you?
I mean, they're still parsing JSON, and if they come across it, it's not a critical one. Yeah. I mean, I guess so. So I guess what it comes down to right now is it needs some time for people on the mailing list to respond to it.
Yeah.
I don't have any other actions. It's not blocking on anything. So waiting a week or two for people to talk about it. And if we decided to go with it, I merge it and make a 17. If not, you can still start a Shepherd review or whatever on it if that's the direction we think we want to go with it. So I don't think we have to decide it right now, but I think that's kind of my feelings on it. Is I'm kind of -0.
Right. I'm going to propose as the chair that I'm going to go ahead and do the Shepherd review on version 16. And there's going to be some period of time that we're going to give me to do that. And during that time, if we want to discuss this new pull request, we can. If we decide we want it and there's support for it, then we can add it in. If not, then we can move forward with 16. We don't have to make that decision right now. And we don't have to hold up the next steps for 16 on it. Does that seem reasonable to everyone?
Aye.
Seems good to me.
Okay.
All right, that's all I have, unless anybody else has any other comments on the draft or the next steps. All right. So I think Frederick is up next.
Hi, Frederick Phil. So I will give you a quick status on the draft interfaces HTTPS delegation. So a quick update. To remind you a bit, the purpose of this draft is to propose extensions to the existing Cdni interfaces to exchange delegation metadata. So based on the last comments we had in Montreal, we try to reflect all of them. So basically, the draft now supports the delegation method objects that are the short-term automatically renewed certificates that is supported in the ACME working group, and also the subsets draft, which is supported in the TLS working group. Also, we add a command to remove the lurk delegation method from this version. So we did, and finally we included the delegation method in the pass metadata. So I think now the draft is ready for adoption. So we now call for adoption.
Yeah, I think it's been getting a lot of feedback on the list. I don't know how Kevin feels about this, but I don't even think we need to do a hum here because we've gotten so much feedback on the list. Your thoughts on that, Kevin?
I think I agree. I think we've seen a lot. We can do a hum if people would like. I think the draft looks good, the updated draft. I sent you a couple of comments, Frederick, on the list. But if you want to take care of those in the next rev when you switch, do we want to go ahead and just do a hum?
I could definitely do one. All right, I got some
do
feedback
one.
from the audience that they would like to see that. So,
Okay.
all right, please hum if you would like to adopt this draft. Please hum now. All right, please hum now if you would not like to adopt this draft. All right, that was pretty clear. There were no hums against adoption, and quite a few for adoption. So, I think the mailing list, we'll leave it to the end of the week. I just wanted to give it enough time to get everybody a chance to get feedback, but I think it's good to go.
Okay, thanks. Any comments?
All right. Ori, I believe you're up next. Which do routing first? Okay. Here's the
Okay, so this draft was adopted last IETF. Basically, what we added here is the ability to have a redirect target capability object that allows the downstream CDN to advertise to the upstream CDN where they want them to redirect by DNS or HTTP. One open issue that was left is how to construct the location for HTTP. So what we have proposed in the past was that the construction of the location would be based on a past prefix, a host, and a past prefix, and the ability to include or exclude the redirecting host as a first pass segment. And there was a proposal from Kevin, I think, that we might consider, instead of having those explicit fields, having some kind of an ABNF construction. So this is kind of a question for this forum, if you think it's more appropriate to have something which is more generic as an ABNF instead of this object. So basically that's it. Kevin, maybe since you proposed that, maybe you can share your view.
I think the object is fine. I could go either way on this one. It's something that I think could be specified more more precisely, I suppose, more generically and more precisely, but it's not really necessary for this particular application. So I could go either way if no one feels strongly about it.
Okay, so maybe I'll just bump it again in the mailing list, and if there are no more objections or proposals around that, I would just leave this subject as it is.
Okay.
Questions? Okay, that was fast. So,
So those are the only updates for that particular document, Ori?
right, yeah, right. So that was the only update. Actually, I haven't changed it since it was moved to group document instead of mine.
Just about ABNF, I haven't read the document, so I probably shouldn't voice an opinion, but this is the type of comment I might raise during a redirectors review. So I hope it's not, but this, if it's unclear, I will tell you basically. I don't think it's going to be a big deal either way.
Okay, thanks. Maybe a general question before I move on to the triggers is that we have multiple new ideas for new metadata objects and footprints or objects, the same as in this document. And the question is, how do we introduce more new metadata objects and footprints as they come along? Should we have separate drafts for each and every one, or what do you think should be the way to go?
I tend to think it depends on how quickly you want to get these through. We can do them as individual drafts. If you have them all and you know what they're going to be and you want to get them all out together, it's a little bit less work on our side to have to push a one draft as opposed to 5 drafts through, right?
Okay.
I think, this is Sanjay Mishra. I agree with Kevin. I think it may be just easier to work on these individually, just so that we are focused on what the topic is and what we're working on. So we're not holding up on a lot of different things. And then, if we feel like we have multiple drafts, it's easy to combine it at some point later on.
Okay, thanks.
Right. If they all get to a last call at about the same time, you can just merge them at that point, right? But you can put them out as they come, I suppose. They'll each have to be adopted separately, or a choice by the working group to go ahead and merge it into the existing document.
All right, we're good?
Yeah.
All right.
Next. Okay, so this is the trigger extension draft. So just a refresher, we added versioning for the triggers because we are changing the interface and we want to have interface versions. We added the ability to select the content that the trigger applies to using regular expression or video playlist. And we added the ability to add generic extension objects that pretty much like the metadata generic objects. It's a kind of list of generic objects that one can implement or introduce new types of objects that would control or restrict the trigger depending on your what you want to do. And we introduced the first 2 generic objects. It's a location policy and time policy. And also we introduced FCI advertisement for the extension object that you can advertise that you support a specific types of object, and also for the versions. So follow-ups from previous IETF, we were requested to replace the ABR protocol type with the media protocol type, so we did that. And there's an issue to consider, and I bring it here. If we want to keep on handling also MSS within this draft, because as far as I know, MSS is not being used also entirely in the industry. So maybe we should just keep it with HLS and Dash. I don't have any strong feeling about that, but maybe others do. There was an issue of implication of regex complexity attacks, and I've added it to the security consideration section. One more issue was adding the ability to use local time within the time policy. It's kind of tricky, and I'm going to discuss this in a moment. And the ability to propagate errors and other issues from all these CDNs along the trigger delegation path. So you could do backtracing of errors and understand where the problem was in which downstream CDN. So adding the local time to the time policies. So this is kind of tricky because the rationale here is that when you execute a trigger, things like repositioning or other heavy stuff, you might want them to happen in specific time slots. But since CDNs are distributed across many regions, in many cases, you may want to do that in specific time slots, but in local times of those regions. not in your local time or any specific time. Just like saying, I want to do that between 2 a.m. and 5 a.m. in your specific regional time. So currently, without that, that could be achieved by having a combination of time policy together with location policy. It has the drawback that it requires multiple triggers. You have to have different triggers for every region. And there was a proposal to add the ability to have a local time flag that indicates exactly what you want, execute at these hours at your local time. So that was the rationale. The question is how to represent a local time. So we cannot use the existing time window object because it's UTC and using Unix epochs, and that doesn't work for local time. Possibly we can add a new time slot object, something which will be different than the time window. And the question is how exactly to represent that time. And I don't have a good answer for that, because if we follow our 339 internet time, so there's no notation for your local time. There's notation for UTC, and there's a notation for a specific offset, but there's nothing like 5 a.m. at your local time. So it's kind of an open question because I don't have a good answer for that yet. If anyone has any observation about how to do that, that would be great. Otherwise, I will just introduce something new. Okay.
Is there another group, another working group that we can ask who owns time objects?
Okay, I will try to figure out that. Somebody written this RFC, so I will try to connect with those people and try to see if there's any kind of observation of how to do that.
I feel like if we put in our own, like you create a string in a string format, and then we say this particular string format is hours, minutes, seconds, and it applies to your time zone. It's easy enough to specify, but we'll probably get dinged somewhere for it.
Yeah, I'll try to follow up with whoever written time spec and see.
Alexei, I don't know of anything to help you in this space, so I think inventing your own is fine as long as it's reasonable. I don't know, it can be a separate Boolean attribute, or you just do variation on RFC 3339 just for no time zone case, but local time zone case, because you have very specific application which actually requires this. Most applications don't want to do that.
Yeah.
So they will use the existing format.
So I'm trying to think if we can generalize that, if there are other type of applications that may need to have something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, I do something. I don't have a good suggestion for you. I don't think you're in trouble because you already researched, and I'm not aware of anything that
Okay.
That is an RFC, for example.
I'm not aware of anything either.
I think if we can borrow as much as we can from 3339 as far as the formatting, their ABNF, that sort of thing, and then just modify it to whatever degree we need to ignore time zone and tell them to use local time. We can make it as close as we can, and then maybe somebody will want it.
I'm now starting to design on the fly, but you can replace the Z
with an L.
With another, exactly. It's just,
yeah.
And it's going to be close enough that a lot of parsers can either be extended or,
yeah,
or they will, fail in a predictable way, hopefully.
Okay, so error propagations. We've added a new error description version 2. Errors may happen in any downstream CDN down the trigger legation path. So this was kind of an issue even before introducing the extensions, but now since we have an extensions, and extensions may or may not be supported by different downstream CDNs, it becomes more of an issue. So we've introduced the new error description version 2, and the errors vector is now errors vector v2, errors v2, and it adds the property CDN to indicate the failing DCDN. The definition of CDN is the same as it is in the original RFC. It's kind of an ID that is indicated by the AS. And when delegating triggers, the delegator DCDN must propagate errors that they have received from downstream CDNs down the delegation path and add these errors to the error v2 array. And the new error, I've added a new error code, E extension, to indicate there was an error due to a trigger extension. Status version 2. So a recap, we already have the status version 2 from the previous draft, previous revision, because we have a trigger v2, and the status v2 includes the trigger v2 instead of the trigger. And now the trigger status version 2 must also include the error version 2 of the error description. So that's it. We bring it to a call for adoption, and I understand it requires rechartering, so I don't know what's the status of that.
Yeah, I think Kevin is going to talk about that a little bit. He did some research on this, and I guess that's actually the next item on the agenda. So maybe we should do Q&A, and then if nobody has any questions, we can move on to the next item in the agenda and address that.
Okay.
So I have two comments on the draft or on the slides. The first question was about whether or not we should continue to have MSS. Is there any harm in keeping it, or do you think it's not worth it at all?
No, I don't think there's any harm in keeping it. I can.
It's still up.
Yeah.
It's still up to the DCDN as to whether or not they support it. So having it in makes it somewhat more flexible, I think.
Okay.
Unless there's going to be a registry for it, but then we still have to go through and add another registry entry at some point.
There is a registry, and we need to add it anyway. So
yeah, so might as well do it. And then what was the other? I don't remember what my other one was, so we can skip it. I'll remember at some point. I still need to do a review of the updated draft, and so it'll probably come out there.
ISO 8601 has a local time format.
which one?
ISO 8601.
Oh, ISO 86. Okay. So I'll follow up on that. Thanks.
Yeah, I think we're good. So the next item on the agenda here is.
It's amazing. We are on time.
Sorry, what's that?
We are on time. This is a first.
Is there a...
It's the next slide in the.
There you go.
Okay. So last time we talked about the need for rechartering if we wanted to do the triggers extension. For those who were there back in IETF 84, we had made a decision not to pursue any type of HAS optimization, HTTP adaptive streaming optimizations at that time in an attempt to try and get all of the base specs out quicker. There was an RFC 6983 that listed out all of the HAS optimizations that were considered at the time. Interestingly enough, pre-positioning of HAS content was not one of them. One of them was retrieving zip files, but not specifically pre-positioning manifests through triggers. And so it's not really covered there in terms of what would be necessary or how it impacts the interfaces. Our existing charter does say that in the event that any protocol extensions or new protocols are necessary, we will recharter. And so we've been looking at the charter, and we discussed it with Alexi. The charter itself doesn't preclude us from doing HAS optimizations to the triggers interface. We have existing text in the charter for doing a control interface and adding some fields to make it more HTTP adaptive streaming seems to fit within that. It's not in any of the things we're not allowed to do in this working group list. So at this point in time, we are looking at it as we can recharter, but it will be the same charter. So we don't actually have to recharter. And we can add an enhancement, an enhanced control interface milestone to our existing milestone list. Does anybody have any comments or issues with this particular approach?
Well, I obviously have no objections. I read the way protocol extensions were written. Maybe it's ambiguous, but I thought it was about HTTP extensions. And because you know, I suppose the text is slightly ambiguous, but you know, it allows you just to add this and continue working. I think that's fine. But if you want to take other items which doesn't clearly fit, you know, you might as well recharter once, right? As opposed to recharter multiple times.
Right. I think one question is, would we want to tackle any additional HTTP adaptive streaming issues? One of the big ones was manifest rewrite, which we're not doing, and I don't think fits in our charter today. And I don't know if this is leading us down that road, but just simply sending a URI with an extension of M3U8 and expecting the downstream CDN to understand it and support it, I don't think is terribly far-fetched for what the triggers interface was intended.
Sanjay Mishra, just a quick question here on the text that you have. Now, when we say submit enhanced Cdni control interface, should the word enhanced be qualified as to what specifically the charter would include, so that the reader understands, you know, what the new charter is actually going to be inclusive of? Because enhanced by itself is not giving to a reader as to what it is that, you know, we're looking to do.
I had intended with HAS support to qualify the enhancement.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, that makes sense for the HAS, but some of the other additional items, as in the Ori's last presentation, that may not be necessarily covered with this language, though, right?
No. So there will be separate separate milestones added for the other documents. Once we adopt HTTPS delegation, once we adopt, and for the request routing, those are just additional metadata. Those have always been considered something we would do, right? The metadata interface is there and it is extensible, and we agreed to be the, you know, standardizing body for new metadata. So within the context of what they currently contain, adding new metadata I think is fine, and we can add charter milestones for adding those documents. But in terms of this is a change to one of the core interfaces, I think has to be specified slightly more precisely.
Yeah, agree. Thanks.
Any other comments? So it sounds like we're gonna do some more milestones here and not have to recharter them. Do we need to hum on that, or is the hum for triggers?
I don't think we really need to hum here if the charter itself is not changing, and it's as long as Alexi's good.
Yeah. Okay, do we want to,
Certain stuff, which is more than just to share something like that. Keep double checking.
yeah, I'm perfectly fine with it. Do we want to now move on to humming about triggers document?
You mean the adoption thereof?
Sorry, yeah, the adoption of it.
Yes.
Since we no longer have to recharter to do that, and we discussed doing that in Montreal, but stopped short because of the rechartering.
Yes.
Okay. Just so everybody knows what we're talking about here. Hold on.
I'm not sure your mic is on.
Hello? It was much louder before, and I noticed it got quiet. So I don't know if they adjusted it, but what's that? Is this better? All right. This one was working at the beginning, so sorry. I apologize for that. All right. So believe this is routing. Right. So the document that I want to do a hum for adoption on is the Cdni triggers SVA extensions. So right now, I'd like you to hum if you are for adoption of this document. Okay. Now, if you are against adoption of this document, please hum now. Okay, I heard several hums for and no hums against. I will follow up on the list with an email about this. And then if everything is good there, we can add it. Any other comments or questions about that? All right. I believe that was that is the end of the meeting. Do you have anything else, Kevin?
Everybody go out and read the documents, review the documents, send out comments on the documents. Other than that, we will continue to try and move forward with these documents. Thanks everybody for coming. Hope you're having a great time in Bangkok. Phil, anything else? I miss going.
Is there, where's the other blue sheet, and has everybody had a chance to sign in?
Yeah.
Anybody know where the other one is? Ah, okay. Does anybody else need to sign it before we go?
So, is the discussion about rechartering closed?
Yeah, so the outcome was that we do not need to recharter because the wording that there was concern around was basically loose enough to allow what we were going to do with simply milestones. Did you have further concern about that?
I mean, is there room for proposing other points that we can add in the charter if we are not rechartering? I know that.
Sure, Emil. What do you have in mind?
I heard that there needs to ease the provisioning, you see, of certificates in the CDN. And this will probably impact the interfaces. And so...
Do you have a concrete problem that we can solve? I mean, the provisioning of certs is handled elsewhere, right?
To go further, I need to better understand how you are going to proceed with the charter. So I understand that you are not rechartering? Or...
Correct.
Okay, good. Okay. But then the last point about the control interface, is the working group going to modify the control interface for adaptive streaming or not?
So the proposed document that Ori has proposes updates to the existing trigger interface. And the current read of the charter is that fits into our existing charter, so we don't need to recharter to get that in. And if folks want to adopt it, then we will do it.
And so on the short term, do we plan to recharter or not?
Not at this time. We will add the 3 new milestones.
Okay, good. So I will exchange by email with the chair about the different point I was speaking about.
Okay. And certainly if you have ideas of new things that we could do.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for clarifying,
Yeah.
because I didn't understand the landscape here. But
Yeah.
Yeah, just to summarize, we're not shutting down the chartering discussion indefinitely. It's just that for the documents that we currently have that we're talking about adoption for, we don't need to. So in the future, if something comes up and we want to recharter for it, we can reopen that discussion and talk about it then. But as of right now, there's no concrete documents out there that we think we need to recharter for. So, all right.
Emil, feel free to write a draft though if you want.
I send in one mail or two, it's shorter.
All right. I think we're good then. Anything else? All right. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Take care.
So I'll give you a quick update. I felt that it's ready for working group last fall. Chris opened up another PR that he wanted to see a feature in. Nobody has responded on the list. I responded to him in the meeting. I'm going to send an email to him, but